I was going to say we're so honored to have with us a guest whose name has become synonymous with courage and conviction. It sounds like you guys already know that from the standing ovation. But in all seriousness, Shabbos Kestenbaum is a Harvard Divinity School graduate, who has been fighting the good fight, fighting anti-Semitism, not just in words, but in action. And it is such an honor and pleasure to have you with us. So thank you, Shabbos. To get started, I think we should begin with the question I think that's on everyone's mind. Is your name actually Shabbos?
I knew it. My name is actually Shabbos. I was in a synagogue 2 weeks ago, and I was sitting in the back, and there were these two older guys. They were looking at the newsletter of the synagogue, and it said Shabbos Kestenbaum is going to speak after Kiddush, and they were thinking, is this a stage name, or do you think it's real? And I was like tempted to say, no, I think it's real. I don't think he's making it up.
At least that was on Shabbos.
Yeah,
because I cannot tell you how my entire week this past week has become like a Who's on First comedy bit, where people are like, April 6th is not Shabbos, it's Sunday.
It's very confusing. I was born on Shabbos, so my parents figured, why not? It was not my choice. I would have picked like Michael or something, but they picked Shabbos. I'll tell you something interesting. My dad printed the first Tanya, which is the magnum opus of Chabad Hasidus. It's a book. He printed it in India, so my oldest sister, her name is India. My brother was born on Yom Ha'atzmaut, so his name is Independence. My mom really likes insects, so my sister's name is Bee, B-E-E. So we did not pick our names, trust me. I would not be this committed to the bit that after 25 years I would say, no, my name really is Shabbos if I was making it up.
So now that we got that out of the way, I do want to see a license afterwards. Okay. Those of us who have been following the case are eager to hear an update on where we're holding. But before that, for those who have not been following the story, can you just walk us through what is the case about? Why are you suing Harvard? Like, what are you looking to accomplish?
Sure. So we filed our lawsuit last January. Our lawsuit basically contends three things, but the first two are the things that really count. One is civil rights violation. So President Trump signed an executive order called 13899 in 2019, and it basically protected the federal protections that Jewish students had on college campuses. And we're alleging that those civil rights protections have obviously been violated by Harvard. The second argument we're making is there's also been a breach of contract. So when I pay Harvard tuition, which between us I don't, I'm on a full scholarship, but hypothetically, if I were to pay them tuition, don't tell Harvard's lawyers, because they're really incompetent, and I don't think they know that. But when I pay tuition, the expectation is that I then receive an educational experience. You know, I'm able to study, I'm able to go to the library, I'm able to delve into the things that I wanted to do when I got accepted into Harvard to begin with. And we're making the argument that we've had diminished educational opportunities, and Harvard has violated their own contract. So those are the crux of the argument. The biggest one, of course, is the civil rights violations. And as I said, I think I said in the film, when we filed our lawsuit last January, Harvard did not apologize for their treatment of Jewish students. They did not recognize the reality of anti-Semitism. They did not come to the negotiating table. They filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning they were asking a judge to toss out our lawsuit and to set a legal precedent so that no Jew in the future could hold them accountable for anti-Semitism. We filed an amended complaint, which is like an update to our lawsuit, in June. Harvard's response was literally the exact same thing. No apology, no recognition, no negotiating table. They filed a second motion to dismiss with prejudice, once again asking the judge, toss out Kestenbaum's case and set a legal precedent so that we can't be held accountable for anti-Semitism in the future. And it bothers me to no end that Jewish students have to be doing this. So the word isn't, happy or proud. But as I said, our Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, in July, he tossed out Harvard's double motions to dismiss, and we're the first case of its kind pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a campus that's actually going to trial. It's never happened before. And thank you. And I'll tell you a little bit behind the scenes, and I have to be careful because I signed an NDA, but after Trump's reelection, Harvard was scared of what the federal response would be, so they reached out to us, and they were desperate to get a settlement. They really wanted the problems to go away. And again, without getting into the details, I told Harvard very clearly, at its goal, at its core, I want to make sure that no student in the future, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, black, white, will have to go through what I and the other plaintiffs had to have gone through. And Harvard was both unable and unwilling to make those basic and obvious concessions. So unfortunately, the other plaintiffs, they did settle. They were anonymous, so I can't talk about them too much. And unfortunately, I'm back to being the only plaintiff, so it's a little lonely.
Can you speak to why they did settle?
So again, being careful with my NDA, I would say this: they felt that this would be the best we could get, even though it wasn't good. Good is better than nothing.
What was it? What did Harvard actually do?
Well, thank God my lawyers don't know I'm here. Okay. Harvard basically agreed to do two things. I could talk about the public stuff. The first one was adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which one of its main goals is it equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which is obviously the case. As a Jew who prays 3 times a day, I pray facing Jerusalem. I mentioned the return to Zion dozens and dozens of times, but almost the entirety of the Jewish calendar revolves around the agricultural cycles in the land of Israel. So returning to Zion and having an appreciation for the land of Israel is integral to being Jewish. So obviously anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. So that's what the IRA definition does. Harvard agreed to adopt it. The second thing Harvard agreed to do was that they were going to have examples on their non-discrimination and bullying policies, examples of what discrimination should look like. So that for the very first time, they actually used an example of a Zionist being excluded from a student club, from an event on campus. They actually used that as an example of discrimination. So those are good positive steps. The problem is when Harvard agreed to that settlement, which was made public the day after Trump was inaugurated, it's literally been violated at least 4 separate times. So there's no enforcement mechanism. So yeah, it looks great on paper, but when there's no enforcement, when no one is being disciplined for committing those violations, that's when we have a problem. And at its core, Jewish
Is that the main reason you didn't settle?
That and other reasons. Look, I believe that in this country we have a crisis of accountability. One of the biggest problems facing us is we have given impunity to lawbreakers. We have incentivized criminality. I mean, Columbia University is a perfect example of this. When 160 students and outside agitators took over Hamilton Hall last year, 160 of them were arrested. The next day, 143 of them were released without bail. I mean, it's insanity how we've allowed lawbreakers to just commit crime with no accountability. So I told Harvard, we want deterrence, and the only way there will ever be deterrence is if you punish people. It sounds rudimentary, it sounds elementary, it might even sound silly, but it's actually incredibly important, because if you don't tell people that the thing they did is wrong and there are consequences to your actions, they know what they're going to do. They're going to do it again. It's not rocket science. So if you have professors who told students, I'm going to cancel class, but if you call for an intifada, I'll give you full credit. That is a major problem. If you have 2 students, which is true, at Harvard Business School who physically assaulted a Jew on campus, and those 2 students are not expelled, that is a problem. And Harvard refused to take any accountability and any responsibility for the culture of anti-Semitism that they normalized, that they accepted, and they celebrated. And I'm not willing to sign a fake piece of paper where I pretend that there's no wrongdoing alleged on either side and we agree to part terms amicably. And I'll tell you this behind the scenes, the plaintiffs who signed that letter, they don't believe it either. Of course they believe Harvard did wrongdoing. That's why they sued them to begin with. And I'm not prepared to sign anything that will allow Harvard to evade their moral rot, their intellectual hypocrisy, and their academic bankruptcy.
Wow. I have a teacher who used to talk really fast, not quite as fast as you.
Well, Ben Shapiro actually told me a few weeks ago I talk too fast, which is weird coming from Ben, but I have been told I talk quickly, so.
My teacher used to say, I'm not talking too fast, you're listening too slow. So you're all listening too slow. I happen to love it because I listen to my podcasts at double speed, and I always said I wish I could do that in real life. And like double speed people, just like, get to the... So you've done that for us. Thank you.
Actually, in the film, I'll tell you another behind-the-scenes thing. Those were my second answers. The first answers, the producer had me say them again, but slower, because he thought I was saying it too fast. So if it was up to me, this movie would have been, 30 minutes tops. So
you can get that version.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that no other suit has gotten this far. What makes your lawsuit unique? How is it different from the other?
Well, first of all, since our case moved past the motion to dismiss, other cases have followed suit. They've actually already used our case as legal precedent. So the case at UCLA is probably the best example of this, where UCLA's Jewish students who are suing, their lawyers used our arguments and said, look, a judge in Massachusetts already agreed with these arguments. So thank God we're already making legal precedents. In terms of why it never got this far to begin with, without getting into the politics, because I don't want to get into trouble, but under federal law, Jews were really never treated as part of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which forbids discrimination based on 3 categories: race, color, and national origin. And religion was never a protected category. What was done under the two previous administrations ago was that they recognized that Judaism is not merely a religion. Judaism is also an ethnicity. It's a people. And when you discriminate someone based on their national origin, that also discriminates their religious identity. So one of the reasons cases never got this far is because federal law was never really on our side. And for the first time, you were actually having dozens and dozens and dozens of these cases being filed, and they all basically follow along the same argument, which is Jews are not just a religion, Jews are also a people. And that's why we've been really effective. What also helps is Harvard's own track record. So I remember when Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, I went to Ukraine, don't tell my mom, and I took Ukrainian refugees over the border into Poland. And I remember meeting a guy, an Irish guy, which he was Irish, nobody's perfect, and he tells me, and that was a very good joke, you should have left. And he tells me, okay, the only jokes you like is self-deprecation.
They don't realize
apparently.
your parents are British.
Oh yes,
so
my parents they're British. By the way, I'm a huge South Park fan, so it's great being here. And seriously, I was very excited. I watched season 25 last night in preparation. And he told me this Irish volunteer in the Foreign Legion, which is Ukraine's volunteer unit in the army, he said, we're so lucky the Russians are our enemies. I said, what? He said, yeah, we're so lucky the Russians are our enemies because they are so remarkably incompetent at winning, military victories. They were supposed to take Kiev in 24 hours, and it's been more than 3 years, and they still haven't taken it. And I really never knew what he meant by that until I met our ideological adversaries at Harvard University. We are so lucky that out of all the enemies we could have, we have these morons. These are people who are incapable. I mean, it's true. These are people who are incapable of walking past an American flag and not burning it. These are people who are incapable of not calling for the eradication of Western civilization. So when I meet with Democrats and Republicans in the Senate, in the House, when I meet with the president, when I go on national media, I barely have to talk about Israel. I just have to talk about America because they make the argument for us. You may not agree with all of the Israeli government policies. You may not agree with the conduct of the war. But at the end of the day, the people that we are fighting are not just fighting us in a vacuum. They're fighting against the core of our Western civilization, the heart of our American democracy, and our liberal values. When you have people who follow other students on their way to class, when they violate all time, place, and manner restrictions, when they send police officers to the hospital and physically assault their professors, the American people have a pretty strict sense of fairness and just, and they don't like those things. So we're incredibly fortunate that of our all ideological adversaries throughout the 3,000-year history of the Jewish people, that the most intellectually challenged people who are challenging us today are these guys on campuses.
Wow. There's some really startling and troubling allegations that have been coming out in the past couple days and weeks of students at Columbia, members of SJP, who 3 minutes before the attacks of October 7th, their social media accounts that were dormant for months all of a sudden light up and say, stay tuned, we have some good things coming, or something, of that nature. How credible are those allegations, and have you seen things like that?
They're very credible. In fact, those allegations were made before this lawsuit. They were around for basically since October 6th. We students were talking about it. The lawyers, I'll give you a quick background. There's an organization called the National Jewish Advocacy Center, and Jack, run by Mark Goldfeder. If you know him, tell him I say hi. He's really good. Okay, someone looked up. So yeah, we like Mark. And he filed, along with my lawyers in the Harvard case, Holtzman and Vogel, they filed a lawsuit, I think it was in the Southern District Court of New York, but I could be wrong on that, against organizations like the National Students for Justice in Palestine, like Code Pink, like WOL Within Our Lifetime, like the American Muslims for Palestine, and they allege that there are these insidious, nefarious connections, not just between American campus groups that are anti-American, but with terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and it's not speculative at all. So for those of you who didn't understand what the rabbi was saying, he's talking about something that actually happened. On October 6th, just 3 minutes before the attack, October 6th our time, just 3 minutes before the attacks in Israel on October 7th, the Columbia University Students for Justice of Palestine organization, they had written on their Facebook, which was inactive for 9 months, they had written on their Facebook, "We're coming back, stay tuned." This is 3 minutes before the events of October 7th. We know for a fact, because Biden's National Security Council corroborated this, that there are anti-democratic, anti-Semitic, and anti-Western countries, chief among them being Iran and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, who are funding a significant amount of the civil unrest we see not just on our college campuses, but on the streets throughout this country. The problem is with that report, it didn't actually say what they were going to do about it. So we do know that there is this dark money that's being funneled into these student groups. The problem is, as I said, number one, we don't know the the extent, and number two, we don't have strong action from the federal government just yet as to what they're going to do about this problem. But it's not really speculative. It's not really allegations. I know that's the terminology you have to use when you're suing someone, but at the end of the day, this is happening. These are facts. This is actually occurring in real time.
That's an actual fact.
Yeah.
There's also an allegation, again, that one of the former hostages who was released said that his captors were talking about how Hamas has, which again, look at the news, it's not.
Yeah, Shlomi Ziv. So this is a hostage. He was rescued. You can watch his rescue operation, actually. I think he was in the same rescue operation. Yeah, it was the same rescue operation where they rescued Noah Argamon. You can see the video of it. So his lawyer and my lawyer are the same person. So I feel very thankful and almost like this deep sense of responsibility that we're not just targeting Harvard, but really we're taking a stand for the Jewish people. So I was with him in Palm Beach about a month or two ago, and he was talking about his stories, and he said, yes, while I was being held captive, they bragged that they have Hamas collaborators on college campuses, chief among them being Columbia University, and he would show this hostage pictures of protests at Columbia, at Harvard, at UCLA, and say, this is what we're doing. It's not just a fight in the Middle East, it's a fight across the world. And if all of you watch October 8th, which you're probably, done with documentaries for now, but there's a documentary called October 8th, I'm in it, and one of the things that they mentioned, which again, we've been talking about for years, and it's a shame it took October 7th for people to start realizing it, but there was a meeting of the American Muslims for Palestine and actual Hamas terrorists in Philadelphia in 1994, and there are recordings of this meeting. If you Google the Holy Land Foundation trial, it was a trial in 2008 and exposed a lot of this anti-Semitic money coming into college campuses. They literally say that we need to fund student movements on college campuses because it's not enough to simply kill in the Middle East. We also have to win the hearts and minds of young people. I mean, they speak about this openly. So we know that it's a dangerous movement, and this is going to sound a little weird, but we have to take a lesson out of their playbook. Just as they are organized, and just as they are mobilized, and just as they are dead set on their goal, so too the Jewish community need to be a lot more mobilized and a lot more organized and a lot more insistent as they are, that we will mobilize the American Jewish community and the American people to fight back as loudly and as strongly and as publicly as ever before.
That was very Rav Noach Weinberg-esque. Right, Rav Noach used to always say, if one person can destroy 6 million lives, imagine what one person can do to build 6 million. So that's very powerful. Why do you think the college campus has become, and it sounds like on both sides, right? Why is that the battleground? Why are they investing so much money to infiltrate college campuses? And why do you feel that your efforts are so important specifically on college campuses?
Sure. Well, first of all, I appreciate the question, but it is also true that while the United States Congress had roughly a dozen hearings on anti-Semitism on college campuses, I know because I testified at a lot of them, one of the most important hearings was a hearing that barely anyone went to, because also I was there, no one was there, and that was a hearing on anti-Semitism in K through 12. And I believe that's actually far more dangerous because a smaller and smaller share of the American people are actually going to college, and I think that's a good thing, and an even smaller share of those people are going to Ivy League universities. Quantitatively, we're not talking about a heck of a lot of people. K through 12, every American goes through it. And when you have in Des Moines, Iowa, and this is true, third graders reading AISH for Intifada, that's a profound problem. So it's not just college campuses, it's the entire education system. But I agree, we are spending a lot of time talking about college campuses. Why? Because unfortunately, institutions like Harvard, Penn, Columbia, UCLA, they purport to train the next generation of American leaders. And by and large, they're kind of right. It's not an exaggeration at all to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with a future congressman, a future senator, even a future president of the United States. And if these are America's future policymakers, if these are America's future judges and jurors, if these are America's future authors of the books your kids and grandkids are going to read, then I'm telling you, not as hyperbole or speculation, I'm telling you as fact that America is at a dangerous inflection point. Because while it is true they call death to Israel, we also know the next part of the sentence is death to America. Yeah, they stole all my Israeli flags. They also stole all my American flags. Yeah, they took down the posters of the hostages. They also took down the posters of Keith Siegel and Omer Nutra and Hersh Poland. So I think we spend a disproportionate amount of time on college campuses, and in particular the Ivy Leagues, is because, unfortunately, they do wield a disproportionate amount of power on the American electorate. The caveat to that is that has been true in the past. And I don't think that is true in the future. And I think that's actually a reason to be optimistic. And I cannot tell you the amount of hedge fund managers, the amount of CEOs, the amount of billionaires, including one who I just spoke to on Friday, who've told me to my face, Shabbos, we do not want to hire Harvard grads anymore and Penn grads anymore and Columbia grads anymore. And I think that's actually a really, really good thing. Harvard does not have a monopoly on... You don't have to clap, just laugh at my jokes, which I admit is harder, but try. Unless it's self-deprecation. You guys are jerks. And I always say, Harvard, Columbia, Penn, all these places, they do not have a monopoly on intelligence. They do not have a monopoly on good-paying jobs. They do not have a monopoly on the national conversation. And as I said, the American people are starting to realize that, and I think it's time for the Jewish community to get out of our own way and start realizing that too. Where I'm from in New York, I went to a very expensive, very elite modern Orthodox high school, and you would be embarrassed, at least when I was there, to say you were going to University of Miami or Vanderbilt or even University of Chicago. And that assertion, that narrative has slowly dissipated, and people are way more receptive to different modes of education, which again, I think is a really good thing.
You know, we have a lot of families in the audience who have kids in high school. And you talk about K through 12. You know, what would you advise them? First of all, are you saying that Jews shouldn't be in the Ivy Leagues? And or if you had one of these families or parents in front of you, or the children, you actually have some high school. So what would you say then? What advice would you give them?
And as I said earlier, I'm sure many parents right now are mad at me and they're thinking, and they'll come up to me at the dessert, which let me eat the cake first. The cake looks really good. Give me like 3 minutes to eat the cake, and then I'll answer all your questions at the dessert. You'll probably come up to me and you'll say, no, we have to send our kids to Columbia now more than ever so they can fight anti-Semitism. Which, number one, if you really believe that your kids should be spending the next 4 years of their life fighting their roommates who draw swastikas, if you really think that that is your kid's calling, then this is what I tell the parents. I say, then pack up and right now move to Dearborn, Michigan, because there's a lot of anti-Semites there, but I have never heard a credible argument from a Jewish parent saying we're going to move to Dearborn, Michigan. You know, people say we have to go to Columbia because we got to fight back. Okay, if you think that's really true, and I've said this to parents, then send your kid to Rockland Community College, because Rockland Community College had a way bigger encampment, and it lasted way longer than the one at Columbia and Harvard. But no parent has ever made a credible argument that their kid should go to Rockland Community College to fight anti-Semitism. You want to know why? No offense to any RCC alum, because no one cares about Rockland Community College. And the argument I am trying to make is we as the Jewish community need to get out of our own way and stop caring about what Harvard and Columbia and Penn and UCLA and Yale think and do, because we are just better than them in every measurable way. I don't just mean Jews in an elitist way. I mean the American people. The American people do not like the blatant political indoctrination that have become ubiquitous at all of these major institutions. And I'll close by saying this. Whether, again, I'm trying to phrase this in a non-political way. Okay, I'll go a different route. The Jewish parents, I'm not trying to age anyone, but different generations, it may have been true that Harvard and Penn and UCLA was a golden ticket to some type of professional success, but I'm really telling you that that's really not the case anymore. And I spoke at the Christians United for Israel conference in DC last summer. And I took the red eye from LA to DC, and I came to my hotel around like midnight, and I was exhausted, I was tired, I did not smell my best, and I wanted to just go to sleep. I opened the door to my hotel room, and there's a gift basket waiting for me from Pastor John Hagee, who is the head of Christians United for Israel. And he writes on this gift basket, Mr. Kestenbaum, we're so sorry what Jewish students are experiencing. We stand with our hostages, not the hostages, our hostages, and, Am Yisrael Chai. And the gift basket was not only, this is in July, the gift basket was not only exclusively kosher food, it was exclusively kosher for Passover food. Like those like crappy macaroons that we would never eat them if it wasn't Passover, but we pretend it's really good. And it occurred to me, I posted this on my social media, and it kind of went a little viral because it really struck a nerve. I said, for months and months and months, Jewish students have been fighting for the bare minimum. We have been trying to say that if you are two students, which I mentioned, who physically assaulted a Jew on campus, you got to be expelled. If you're university and there's a quid pro quo to accept Qatari money in order, and as a result, you will hire an anti-Semitic professor, that is completely unethical. And we have to fight them tooth and nail. We have to fight them in court and hope that a judge has enough sympathy. So while we are doing that, at the same time, there are peoples, there are institutions, there are religions, and there are universities that don't just accept and tolerate Jews, but love Jews and welcome Jews and want Jews. And why would we insist on sending our kids to institutions that at best do not want us there, and at worst, all of the values that you hear in this community, that you hear as being part of AISH, believe in, a love of Israel, a love of Judaism, some degree of affinity to the Torah, all of those things at best won't be accepted, and at worst will be scorned and denigrated and humiliated. Why would you send your kids to those institutions? It's such a bizarre argument that we have to send them there, especially with the concurrent fact that the American people don't like those institutions either. So we as the Jewish community need to get out of our own way. Send your kids to places where they will thrive, where their values will be amplified and celebrated.
It seems almost like, especially as I hear you talk about how this isn't something you would want on any of these people's children, and not something that you necessarily would have chosen for yourself. This kind of like fell into your lap. Yeah. Do you feel it's, this leadership position that you're in now, do you feel like that's a burden that you've been forced to carry, or is this...
Wow, it's very therapeutic. Is it a burden? I mean, I'll say this. If you Google my name, which please don't, please. But if you do, I mean, I just get attacked so often, and it's silly criticism. I've been disinvited from speaking at places because of my politics. I've had rocks thrown through the window. I get death threats weekly from the far left and the far right. I'm very bipartisan. Both sides want to kill me. And that's my one political statement. And, that's really not been great. I don't like, the death threats. I don't like when the pro-Palestinians call me a baby killer. It's not great. But what bothers me the most, without question, way more than the death threats, way more than the photoshopped images of me in an Auschwitz gas chamber, the thing that bothers me the most is internally when Jews and Jewish leadership, they disinvite me or they criticize me or they call me, someone who's just looking for attention, someone who just wants to capitalize on October 7th, someone who's just interested in the money. Those are criticisms I will not be able to get over. That really, really hurts. I mean, there are synagogues who literally disinvited me because they disagreed with my politics, which is insane. And I'm sure many of you disagree with my politics, and that's fine. That's good. That's healthy for a democracy. But to be unable to even talk about it is crazy. So I don't want to say it's a burden because I'm privileged and fortunate to have met some pretty important people and to do some pretty cool stuff and to travel, so I'm not complaining and I'm certainly not a martyr, I'm certainly not a victim, but the internal divisions is something I could never have anticipated and is certainly something that has really, really brought me down, and I can see why young people are not enthusiastic or motivated to join the Jewish leadership or Jewish nonprofit because it is so terrible. Wow, that was a very depressing answer. I'm trying to think of a good joke to make that better, but... It's very therapeutic. After October 7th, it was either I could pay for a therapist or get paid to speak, and I picked option 2. It's been a lot more profitable, but I appreciate you guys being my therapist for the night.
So since I am a fan of group therapy, if we can open it up, probably we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
First of all, thank you very much for coming here, and more importantly, for all that you've done and are still doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
The question that I've got is, recently in Gaza, as I suspect about 99% of this audience knows, there have been protests against Hamas, and the Hamas has taken and murdered one of the leaders, and yet the protests continue. They're on a relatively small scale, but they're there. It isn't spoken of much in our media, which is a shame, but is that something that can be useful in talking to the protesters by saying, by the way, are you guys pro-Palestinian, in which case, do you stand with the Palestinians who are against Hamas, or are you pro-Hamas?
Sure. So the question was, there are a lot of anti-Hamas protests in Gaza happening right now, and one of the leaders of these anti-Hamas protests was actually killed, of course, by Hamas. So the question was, can that be an effective tool to tell the alleged pro-Palestinians on campus that, if you're pro-Palestinian, you should be in support of this protest? So Ben Shapiro has this line, facts don't care about your feelings, which is, in the face of empirical data and evidence, it's irrelevant how you emotionally relate to it, because the facts and the numbers and the figures don't lie. That's mostly true. But the converse is a heck of a lot more true, which is feelings really don't care about your facts. They really don't care about your facts. We were the first university in the world, and I actually think the only university, because of Harvard Chabad, that brought in that 47-minute Hamas propaganda video of the GoPro footage that they filmed on October 7th. And about 500 people show up. The president at the time, Claudine Gay, did not show up, and 2 days later she gives her wonderful congressional testimony, and that was jokes. It was a really bad testimony, but you guys clearly didn't watch it. And there were about 500 people who showed up. The overwhelming majority of the people who showed up to watch that 47-minute video, and we brought in the Israeli ambassador to the UN, we brought in Bill Ackman, we said here at Harvard more than any other institution, students need to see this. almost all the people who showed up were Jews. I mean, almost all of them. People who really didn't need to see the video because we're kind of on the same team anyway. And that is because you will never be able to convince the students in my class who seriously believe that October 7th did not happen, but if it did happen, it was a good thing. You can show them the most grotesque, horrific images. It will literally not sway them in any way, because as they will tell you to your face, as they've told me, resistance is justified when people are occupied. I remember having a serious debate with my classmates shortly after October 7th as to whether the nails lodged in Jewish women by Hamas constituted rape or not. I was of the opinion it did, and my classmates were of the opinion it did not. So you can't convince people in the face of overwhelming facts and data and figures if their feelings simply will not be susceptible to it. How do we reverse that? I honestly don't know. I was part of a delegation with the Israel Foreign Ministry last month, and we met behind closed doors with the foreign minister. I had a meeting last week with President Herzog in his home. I met with Prime Minister Bibi when he was in DC, which was, I guess, 2 months ago. And we speak about these things. How do we take back the narrative? Because if you're a progressive, there is literally no more progressive dream in the most repressive, archaic region than the state of Israel. I mean, Israel is the greatest act of decolonization in human history. Everything that the pro-Palestinians pretend that Gaza is what Israel actually is right now. It is this progressive utopia, and we're so bad at telling that story. So we always have these meetings. How can we do it better? And on October 6th, I was a nerd writing mediocre research papers in the library, and I'm still a nerd, I just don't write as many research papers, but I was really not in a leadership role. I was sort of thrust into this, and I really don't have any good answers. I wish I had better news for you, but how do you convince people whose feelings will not allow them to be convinced in the face of facts? I just don't know. What I can say is the facts won't matter, because I agree with you. We can talk about it. Well, if you really care about the Palestinian people, you would do everything in your power to free Palestine from Hamas. If you care about decolonization, you would support the indigenous people, the Jewish people, returning back to their land. If you care about democracy, you would support the fact that Israel has had 6 elections in the last 5 years. I agree with all of those points. The problem is their inability and unwillingness to engage. I'll make this one last point. I know I give a long answer, so I apologize. A producer of a major network television reached out to me shortly after October 7th, and he said, we want to do a major debate on Harvard's campus, and we'll live stream it. And you, Shabbos, will be the token pro-Israel Jew, which, I'm used to at this point, and we'll find a token...
Your name is Shabbos.
Yeah. And we'll find an anti-Israel, or a pro-Palestinian supporter on Harvard's campus. We'll do a public debate, and the whole point is at the end, you'll shake hands or you'll hug or something, and you'll model to the rest of the country how we can disagree better, how we can model respectful disagreement. And to this day, that interview, that debate has never been aired, it's never been filmed, because to this day we have not been able to find one pro-Palestinian who's willing to debate us, because in their own words, we don't debate Zionists and we don't legitimize your narrative. How do you combat that mentality? It's a really good question. I mean, we could get rid of DEI, but that's a different solution. But it's a major, major problem.
Okay, I think I have time for one more question. Kevin, in the front.
So I think one of the big things, we look at everything that's going on, we see all this, taking on a lawsuit against Harvard, major monumental task. I think most of us would go, where do we begin? So for all of us who aren't doing something that seems impossible, what can we practically do to help, to improve the situation, to combat anti-Semitism that kids are facing around the country?
Sure, thank you for the question. I'll give 3 quick examples, and then I want to get to the biggest example that could really make immediate change. Number 1, I went to Harvard to study the Holocaust. That's why I'm so depressed all the time. And I can tell you that as someone who's been to Poland like 30 times, I actually have an arrest record in Poland. It's probably why I'm still single. Probably one of many reasons. You guys, you laugh at all the wrong jokes. It's unbelievable. I'm telling Boulder on you guys, like those Denver jerks, I will tell you this, Holocaust museums are great and they're really important. You should all go there. We don't need more of them. We really don't. We don't need you to send your $18 or $18,000 check to the major Jewish organizations, because they're going to spend or not spend the same money. They're going to have the same gala dinner with or without your contribution. The dirty secret in the Jewish community is of the many, many people who followed me on my way to class, the many people who called for an intifada, the many people who signed a letter on the night of October 7th blaming Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. A lot of those people were Jewish. Zev's Jewish, Hannah's Jewish, Scott's Jewish, Avi's Jewish. I mean, these are Jews who I've sat in classrooms with, and these are Jews who cannot identify a mitzvah outside of Tikkun Olam, which, hate to break it to you, it's not a mitzvah. These are individuals who cannot point to Israel on a map. They've never been to Israel. They have no affiliation with the Jewish synagogue. They have no affiliation with the Jewish day school. And as the ethics of our fathers teaches us, that each Jew is responsible for the other. This is a profound failing on the Jewish community, that we have allowed thousands and thousands of these Jewish people to grow up in an environment where they genuinely believe that the right thing to do is to call for an intifada and follow other Jews on their way to class. So if you want to help, you as a community would radically reinvest your financial allocations to make sure that there's not a single American Jew today who's going to public school because their parents can't afford yeshiva. You would make sure there's not a single American Jew today who doesn't know where their nearest AISH or Chabad or synagogue is. You would make sure that there's not a single American Jew today who did not have the opportunity to go to Israel at least once on a fully subsidized trip. I mean, that 100%, we have to make radical reinvestments in Jewish education. It's not enough to combat anti-Semitism. That's really not what I do. I focus way more on not fighting against, but fighting for the Jewish people, fighting for Jewish values, fighting for the Jewish homeland. So number one, make sure your kids have a very, very strong Jewish education. Keep them involved and affiliated with AISH for as much as possible, for as long as possible. The second thing I would say that you can practically do is, one of the reasons I was late is we were actually having a debate at the World Zionist Congress, which I'll talk about in 10 seconds, and I represented my slate, and I was the youngest person there by like 40 years, and we were able to ask another slate a question, and so I asked one of the slates who got the most votes in last year's election. I said, you keep talking about youth empowerment. I'm curious, of your current delegates who were elected 5 years ago, who are part of the World Zionist Congress, how many of them are under the age of 30? And he gave me, a 10-minute disquisition on like women empowerment or something, but he didn't give me an answer because the answer is zero. There were zero people. If you're on the board of a synagogue, if you're on the board of a JCC, if you're on the board of a school, don't talk about youth empowerment. Bring youth and have them talk. They're not tomorrow's leaders. They are today's leaders. I mean, that's what I told President Herzog last week. It is so unbelievably frustrating when I go to all these major Jewish galas. I mean, they've stopped inviting me, but when I used to go, it's not tomorrow's leaders. They are literally fighting the fight that fixing the problem that they did not create. People often ask me, how did anti-Semitism get so bad? You know what my answer is? I don't know. I've only been around for 24 years. I should ask you that. I don't mean you guys, but where's the leadership? So make sure that if you have an event, if you have a dinner, you have a gala, you have a program, make sure Jewish students are there and they're talking. And the third thing I would say is, it's on your screen. There's a little, very not well-known organization, it's run really poorly, called the World Zionist Congress. The World Zionist Congress was founded by Theodor Herzl in 1897. In 1897, in Basel, Switzerland, Theodor Herzl tells the first Zionist Congress that the only way this movement, the movement of reclaiming the land of Israel, will succeed is if we bring, he literally uses these words, if we bring university students into the movement. He said that in 1897, and unfortunately the vision of Theodor Herzl was never realized because young people have never been part of the World Zionist Congress. The World Zionist Congress allocates roughly $1.5 billion every single year.
Billion with a B.
Yeah, billion with a B every single year. Every single year. The World Zionist Congress is the International Congress of the Jewish people. And most Jews in America don't really vote, which is why the slates today that have the most power are slates that are really not representative of the Jewish community. The elections are held once every 5 years. It is currently being held right now. The polls opened in March, and they go until May 4th or May 6th. The point being, as I'm talking, you should scan the QR code and vote. I decided a few months ago that the World Zionist Congress, which allocates $1.5 billion every year, they should have young people in that Congress, because as I just said, young people are not tomorrow's leaders, young people are today's leaders. So I reached out. There are 22 slates that are running, sort of like political parties. I reached out to 4 of the political parties saying, hey, I would love to be part of your slate and to be one of your candidates, and I can bring a lot of students. And all of them said no. There was only one organization that said yes, and that was AISH. I'm not saying this because I'm on AISH's slate. I'm on AISH's slate because I'm saying all this and I believe in it. We have assembled the largest collection of American Jewish students on college campuses to ever run for the World Zionist Congress ever, and it's not even close. Thank you. It's not even close. The most number of American Jewish college students, like Eli, like Eden, if you've seen Jewish students testify in front of Congress, if you've seen them sue their schools, if you've seen them on social media or drafting op-eds, they are on the AISH slate. As I said, we've assembled the most amount of college students to ever run for the World Zionist Congress. And we want to make sure that all of the issues I was just talking about, radical reinvestments in Jewish education, giving money not to the major organizations, but to the students themselves, because they know how best to spend it, we can only do it if people vote for us. It's the only way. And it is very, very frustrating that so many people, again, the adults in the room, will tell us how brave we are and how sorry they are. Which, number one, you don't need to tell me how brave I am, because I call my mom every day and she tells me. And you don't need to tell me how sorry you are, again, I don't mean you. There was actually a CEO of a major Jewish nonprofit, and right before I went to testify in front of Congress, he said, I won't say which nonprofit, of course, but he said, I'm so sorry what you're going through, and then he walked away. It's like, buddy, I don't need you to tell me how sorry you are. Your budget is worth more than $1 billion. Tell me what you're going to do to fix the problem. And we decided to run for the World Zionist Congress because no adult in the room were telling us how they were going to fix the problem. So we're running ourselves, and we really, really, really need your support. The election only happens once every 5 years, and I urge you, if you really think that empowering young people is important, we're the only Slate that is doing it. And because the election barely happens, we can't let this moment post-October 7th go by, and we had a pivotal chance to bring people onto the negotiating table, to bring young people to talk about allocating funds, and we just didn't support them. Because this really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This Slate, if we can't get it now, post-October 7th, we're not going to get it in 5 years from now. So I really urge you, scan the QR code right now, or you can go to aish.com/vote.
As Shabbos mentioned, it is so important to vote in the WZO election, and the time is now. We only have a couple of days left to vote, so get out there and vote. Make sure all your friends do. AISH is Slate number 10. You can find a link to vote in the show notes. If you have any questions or have difficulty voting, feel free to reach out. All the information also is in the show notes. If you enjoyed this and our other podcasts, don't forget to subscribe, share with a friend, and we'll see you back here next month.